All societies must solve difficult and complex problems. But those problems are rarely solved by individuals. They're often solved by the hive mind, a group of individuals sharing information, coming together, and solving problems. A perfect example of this is the stock market, where many individuals collect data, collect information, come together, and make decisions predicting, buying, selling, and trying to understand patterns in our world's economy and in companies. There's no leader of the stock market, right? All of these patterns that we see emerge that help to drive our entire world's economy come from a bunch of individuals coming together and working together to solve problems. The robustness of the world's stock market and the world's economy come from a diversity of approaches that these individuals take. For example, some individuals may be more risky, some may be more risk averse. But the diversity of approaches that these individuals can take allow for stability because no one approach ends up taking the lead. So the diversity of approaches when we solve these large societal complex problems is absolutely critical. The Honeybee Society, unsurprisingly, also uses the hive mind to solve complex societal problems. The Honeybee Society does have a queen, but she's not the leader. She doesn't know generally what is going on in the colony, and she doesn't tell anyone what to do. The entire Honeybee Society is organized by workers collecting information about their environment, coming together, sharing that information, and affecting change on the entire society. Now, you can't really tell by looking at honeybees because all of the worker bees look pretty much identical, but there's a lot of diversity in the honeybee colony. For example, all of the workers move through different jobs throughout their lifetime, so they're doing different tasks. They learn in different ways, which is one thing that I study in my lab. They perceive their environment differently, and they can communicate about their environment differently to each other. So there's a lot of diversity here that is pretty subtle, but we don't exactly see. But that diversity is absolutely critical for the Honeybee Society to thrive and solve large complex problems such as cooling the entire colony down when it's very hot or collecting enough food for everyone. So to understand how society can tackle large and complex problems, I think it's important to understand how the diversity of approaches that these individuals take when coming together to solve these problems benefits the society. So let's think about an aspect of the human society when we move through and have diversity of approaches throughout our lives. So when I was younger, I started out most of my jobs as a trainee where I was doing pretty basic jobs working with a supervisor. Then I moved on to doing somewhat more complex jobs independently. Then eventually I became an expert where I was the one working independently, doing complex jobs, and also training others. A very straightforward example of this occurs in training to be an electrician, where you start out as an apprentice, you are doing the most basic tasks, just kind of learning the ropes, working to understand the basics of the job and working closely with others. Then you move on to being a journeyman, where you're working independently, maybe working on some more complex tasks. Then you move on to being a master electrician, where you're doing the most complex jobs and maybe even some risky jobs like this electrician who's up on this lift and working on live wires. And this master electrician likely trains other individuals as well. So they're the expert. People are coming to them for information. The same exact thing happens in the Honeybee Society. So all workers in the Honeybee Society go through different tasks throughout their lifetime, where first they're starting out doing the most basic jobs, learning the ropes, being a honeybee inside the safety of the colony, and then moving on to finishing their lives as a forager, doing the most complex tasks. So as a nurse, the bees are working inside the colony. They're cleaning the different cells out. They're taking care of the developing baby bees or the larvae inside of the colony. And then they move on to, and this is in the safety of the colony, right? So they're getting to know how to be a honeybee in the safety of the inside of the colony. Then they move on to being middle-aged, where, just like some of us during our middle age, they don't know exactly what to do, but they're moving away from the safety of the inside of the colony, going to the outside of the colony, looking to do jobs like fanning, which helps to cool the colony down, undertaking, which keeps the colony clean, and guarding behavior, which is depicted here. So this honeybee is a guard bee. She's actually protecting the entrance of the colony, and she's like the bouncer of the colony. So she's checking everyone, making sure that they belong, because sometimes honeybees from other colonies will try to come in and steal food. So she's protecting the colony, making sure everyone who comes in belongs. And then all honeybee workers finish their lives out as foragers. So they're leaving the colony, doing this very complex and relatively risky job, where they're visiting flowers, they're learning the complex information from the flowers, the environment, like smells and colors, and they are doing this job to feed the entire colony. So not only do we see this diversity across jobs and across the lifetime of these worker bees, but even within the foraging class, the foragers even split up even further in the diversity of approaches they take for collecting food. So for example, some foragers will collect honey and nectar, some foragers will collect pollen, and they work together to make sure the colony has enough nutrition. So not only do we see this diversity of approaches throughout the lifetime of the bee, but we see this even with the jobs, the independent jobs that those bees do. There's a diversity of approaches that these bees can take to accomplish their jobs. And this diversity of approaches is important to solve these large, complex problems like feeding the entire colony. We as a society were recently faced with a massive societal level problem, a pandemic. And throughout the world, and even throughout our country, there was a variety and a diversity of approaches that were taken to help defeat the pandemic. So for example, some countries like Australia and New Zealand decided to close their borders so that they were trying to stop the spread of the pandemic across the world and through their countries. Some countries or continents like the United States and Europe decided to take a more open approach, but focus on treatments and vaccines to stop the spread of the pandemic. In the honeybee colony, they're also faced with pandemics, and they take a diversity of approaches to mitigate the spread of pathogens as well. So for example, this honeybee has been exposed to a pathogen, and she's socially distancing. Honeybees that are exposed to pathogens will actually remove themselves from the colonies. They'll stay outside, they'll fly away, they'll start cleaning themselves and working on feeling better. And they won't try to go back into the colony until they're feeling better. Sometimes they do try to go back in the colony, however, before they feel better, and those guard bees work to keep them out. So when a sick bee tries to enter the colony, the guard bees prevent them from doing so. So this is a depiction of that guard bee preventing a bee that has been exposed to a pathogen from going into the colony. And that's critical because if we think about contact tracing, for example, the more social interactions you have, the more likely the disease is to spread. And there is a lot of social interactions in the honeybee colony. And finally, bees can also inoculate each other after they've been sick. So once a bee has recovered, they can actually share their immunity by feeding with each other in the honeybee colony, and that can help spread that immunity throughout the entire society. So these diversity of approaches is absolutely critical to defeating this massive problem like a pandemic. We also see this in smaller examples. So for example, in a company, companies that are more diverse end up solving problems better, they solve problems faster, and they come up with more innovative approaches to solve their problems. When companies go public, the more diverse the leadership is in that company, those companies end up being valued higher compared to companies with less diversity on their leadership team. So we see this importance of diversity of approaches not only in large, complex societal problems, but also in smaller examples like groups, companies, and other business type situations. Societies will inevitably face large and complex problems. And even though we know that diversity is important to solving these problems, we don't know and completely understand the exact mechanisms that help diversity help us solve problems. So that's one of the aspects of my research here at Marquette University. I work to understand how the diversity in the honeybee colony allows them to solve large problems like keeping the entire colony cool during the summer or when they're working to collect food for their entire colony. So the next time you're working on a complex problem or the next time we are faced with a massive societal level problem like a pandemic, I urge you to think back to these tiny insects and how they employ diversity to solve big problems. Thank you.